The taste of dirt and copper filled her mouth, and she could not tell any more which was the soil of the borderlands and which was the blood leaking from the split in her lower lip. Her knees had gone numb 2 miles back. The pup tucked against her chest had stopped whimpering 10 minutes ago, and that silence was worse than any scream she had ever heard in the breeding wards of the Ashenmoor pack. She pressed her cracked fingers against his tiny ribcage and felt it. Faint, a bird's wing brushing glass. Still alive. She kept crawling. The border fence between Ashenmoor territory and the Black Vale Kingdom was not a fence at all, but a line of black ironwood trees, their roots woven so tightly together that not even rabbits could pass. But rabbits did not know about the drainage culvert that ran beneath the eastern ridge, the one she had memorized 3 years ago, while scrubbing the latrine trenches near the Border Patrol station. She had watched the water flow south through a pipe no wider than a barrel, and thought in the idle way of someone who expected nothing from life that a small enough body could fit through there. She had been right. Her shoulders had scraped the rusted metal so hard that her coat hung in strips. The pup she carried in a sling, made from her own torn undershirt, pressed to her collarbone, where he could feel her heartbeat. His name was Wren. He was 7 weeks old. He was not hers. She had stolen him from the Alpha's private nursery 4 hours ago, because when she had gone in to change the bedding, she had found him alone in a crate, meant for sick dogs, burning with fever, his lips cracked white, a hand-scrawled note pinned to the blanket that read in the Ashenmoor Beta's handwriting, "Runt, do not feed. Let nature take its course." Wren was Kieran Ashenmoor's son, the legitimate heir, the child of his dead Luna who had bled out during the birth while the pack physician was attending to the Beta's sprained ankle instead, and the Beta Gregor who had spent the 7 weeks since the Luna's death systematically dismantling every trace of her from the pack house didn't want an heir that might one day challenge his newly constructed power. So Wren was dying in a dog crate. And no one was coming. No one except Lyra. She was 23 years old. She had been the pack's night shift healer's assistant for 6 years, which meant she emptied bedpans, boiled instruments, mopped blood, and occasionally, when the actual healer was drunk enough, stitched wounds that the healer's hands were too unsteady to close. She had no wolf. Her shift had never come. At 13, when every other pup in her age group had shifted for the first time, in the moonlit clearing behind the pack house, Lyra had stood in the center of the circle, shaking waiting while nothing happened. The pack had watched. Her mother, already sick with the wasting disease that would kill her by winter, had watched from a wheelchair at the edge of the tree line. Nothing happened. They called her hollow after that, as in empty, as in a log with nothing inside. She was not supposed to be in the nursery at all. Her duties ended at the clinic. But 3 nights ago, she had heard Gregor's mate, a sharp-faced woman named Petra, say to the head cook, "Don't bother preparing the nursery bottles anymore. The situation is resolving itself." The situation. A 7-week-old baby. Lyra had started planning that night. She had no money, no wolf, no allies, no family. Her mother was dead. Her father had been a drifter wolf who had passed through Ashenmoor territory and left nothing behind except Lyra and a faded photograph that her mother kept in a locket. She had looked at that photograph once as a child. A man with pale grey eyes and a strange mark on his wrist that her mother said was a birthmark. Lyra had the same mark, a small crescent on the inside of her left wrist, like a scar from a moon-shaped blade. It meant nothing, or it meant something she had never bothered to investigate, because when you are busy, surviving mysteries about dead fathers are a luxury. She kept crawling. The forest floor on the Black Vale side smelled different, sharper. Pine resin and frozen stone and something underneath that. something metallic and alive like the air before a lightning strike. Blackvale territory, the most powerful pack on the continent, ruled by an alpha king who had not taken a mate in 31 years of life, and who was known in the whispered stories that even Ashenmoor wolves told to scare their children as the beast of Blackvale. They said his wolf was so large it blocked out the moon. They said he had killed his own father to take the throne, though other stories said his father had gone feral, and Kyle Blackvale had done what mercy required. They said he could hear a lie the way other wolves heard a heartbeat. Lyra did not care about any of this. She cared that Blackvale had a healer, a real one, a wolf named Maren, who was famous across 3 territories for saving pups that other healers had given up on. If Lyra could reach Maren before Wren's fever burned through his tiny body, then maybe. Maybe. The ground sloped upward. Her arms shook. She had not eaten in 2 days because Petra had cut her rations again, claiming that wolves who could not shift did not need full portions. Her stomach had passed the point of cramping and settled into a low, constant ache that felt like a stone lodged beneath her ribs. Her vision kept going grey at the edges, the trees smearing into watercolour shapes. She bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted fresh blood, and the pain brought the world back into focus. Wren made a sound, a thin, reedy whine like a kitten mewing through a closed door. "I know," she whispered. Her voice was raw. "I know. Stay with me." She crested the ridge and the trees opened into a clearing. Moonlight poured through the gap in the canopy like milk into a bowl, and in that light she saw the border patrol station. A stone building with a thatched roof, smoke rising from a chimney, a wooden post out front with the Blackvale sigil carved into it. A black wolf with amber eyes, mouth open, teeth bared. She was supposed to feel fear. This was enemy territory. Ashenmoor and Blackvale had not been at war exactly, but the relationship was the kind where ambassadors spoke in clipped sentences, and border wolves sometimes came back with new scars. An Ashenmoor Omega crawling into Blackvale territory in the middle of the night would be treated as a spy or an invader, or simply an inconvenience to be disposed of. But Wren's breathing had changed, shallow, stuttering, the spaces between breaths growing longer. She stood up, or tried to. Her legs buckled, and she caught herself on a birch tree, the bark peeling under her fingers like wet paper. She adjusted the sling, making sure Wren's face was clear, making sure air could reach him. And she walked, stumbling, dragging her left foot, which she was fairly certain she had broken sometime during the crawl through the culvert. Each step sent a bright, hot wire of pain from her ankle to her hip. She made it to the door of the patrol station. She knocked. The sound was barely audible, her knuckles scraping wood. She tried again harder, and the door swung open. The wolf who answered was enormous. Not tall exactly, but wide, with a neck like a tree trunk, and arms that strained the seams of his black patrol uniform. He had a thick beard and small dark eyes, and he looked at Lyra the way a man looks at a stray cat that has wandered onto his porch. Mild annoyance, vague pity. What in the... He stopped. His nostrils flared. His eyes dropped to the bundle at her chest. "Please," Lyra said. The word came out broken, split into 2 syllables by a cough that tasted like iron. "He needs a healer. Please. He's 7 weeks old. He's dying. I'll go back. I'll let you take me prisoner. I'll do whatever you want. Just please get him to Maren." The patrol wolf stared at her. Behind him, she could see 2 more wolves, at a table cards, spread between them, mugs of something steaming. They had all gone still. "You came through the culvert," the bearded wolf said. It was not a question. He could see the rust stains on her arms, the pipe-shaped bruises on her shoulders. "Yes. With a pup. He's not mine. He's Kieran Ashenmoor's son. The heir." They were letting him die. The words hung in the air like smoke. One of the wolves at the table pushed back his chair. The scrape of wood on stone was very loud. The bearded wolf, whose name was Tormund, opened the door wider. "Get inside." She stepped over the threshold. The warmth of the fire hit her like a wall, and her body, which had been running on nothing but adrenaline and desperation for hours, simply stopped. Her knees buckled. Tormund caught her with one arm, and she felt the impossible gentleness of a large man who understood that the thing he was holding was breakable. "Easy," he said. Wren cried. A real cry, not the reedy whine from before, but a full-throated infant wail that filled the small station. Lyra pulled back the sling, and in the firelight the pup's face was flushed red with fever. His tiny fists clenched his mouth open. "He's burning up," Tormund said. He pressed 2 fingers against Wren's forehead and pulled them back as if he had touched a stove. "Marcus, radio the main house. Tell them we need Maren at the eastern station. It's 3 a.m, Tor. I don't care if it's the second coming of the moon goddess. Radio the main house, now." Marcus moved to the communication equipment. The second wolf, a younger man with a fresh scar across his chin, brought Lyra a cup of water. She drank. The water was cold and clean and tasted like mineral rock, and it was the most extraordinary thing she had ever put in her mouth. She drank until the cup was empty, and then she held it out, and the young wolf refilled it without being asked. "What's your name?" Tormund asked. He had taken Wren from her, and he was holding the pup against his broad chest, rocking slightly with the unconscious ease of a man who had done this before. "Lyra. I'm nobody. I was the night healer's assistant at Ashenmoor. You crawled through a rusted drainage pipe with a broken foot and a dying infant." Tormund looked at her with something she could not immediately identify, because it had been so long since anyone had looked at her this way. It was respect. "That's not nobody," the radio crackled. Marcus said. "Main house responding. Maren is on her way. ETA 20 minutes. But Tor..." The Alpha heard the call. Tormund went very still. "The Alpha King is coming," the young wolf whispered. "He heard Ashenmoor air, and he's coming himself. 5 minutes out. He was already in the eastern forest." Lyra's blood, which had just started to warm in the heat of the fire, went cold again. Kyle Blackveil. The beast. Coming here. In 5 minutes. She looked at Wren in Tormund's arms. The pup's cry had faded to a weak panting. His eyes were half closed. His skin had gone from red to an ashy grey that made her stomach drop. "Please," she said to no one to the universe. "Please, just let him live. I don't care what happens to me." Tormund looked at her with that steady gaze. "Nothing is going to happen to you." She wanted to believe him. She had spent 6 years in a pack that treated her like furniture, and before that, 7 years as a motherless child that the pack raised out of obligation and resentment. She did not believe kind words. She believed actions, and the action she was watching a battle-hardened border wolf rocking a dying enemy pup against his chest that she believed. The door opened without a knock. The cold came in first. Not the cold of winter, but something older and deeper, a cold that came from the presence of something so powerful that the air itself contracted. The fire in the hearth actually dimmed the flames, pulling inward, as if trying not to be noticed. He filled the doorframe. That was the first thing she registered. Not that he was tall, though he was, easily 6.5 feet. Not that he was broad, though his shoulders barely cleared the frame, but that he filled the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical dimensions. The room shrank around him. Gravity shifted. She felt her wolf. No, she did not have a wolf. But she felt something. Deep in her chest, in the hollow place where her wolf should have been. Something stirred. Like a creature turning over in its sleep. Kyle Blackveil stepped into the patrol station, and Lyra forgot how to breathe. He was not what she had expected. The stories described a monster, a beast in human skin, a creature of nightmares. And yes, there was something predatory about him, something in the way he moved that suggested a very large, very dangerous animal wearing a man as a costume. His jaw was sharp enough to cut paper. A scar ran from his left temple to his chin, pale against dark skin, bisecting his cheekbone. His hair was black, cropped short, military close. His eyes were amber, not brown, not gold. Amber, the exact color of pine resin, held up to firelight, and they were looking at her. Not at Tormund, not at the pup. At her. He stopped moving. In the middle of the room, 4 feet from where she sat in the wooden chair with her broken foot propped on a stool, the Alpha King of Blackveil stopped moving the way a river stops flowing. Completely. Impossible. His nostrils flared. His pupils dilated, the amber irises shrinking to thin rings around black. His hands, which had been at his sides, curled into fists so tight that his knuckles cracked. "Mine," he said. The word came out low. Not loud. Not a shout. A sound from the basement of his voice, from the place where the wolf lived, and it vibrated through the room like a tuning fork struck against bone. Lyra stared at him. "What, mate?" His voice was barely controlled. She could hear the fracture lines in it, the places where the human was holding the animal back by the thinnest of threads. "You are my mate." "That's impossible. I don't have a wolf." He crossed the distance between them in 2 steps. She flinched, and he stopped. Dead. Mid-stride. His whole body rigid with the effort of not moving like a man who has stepped on a landmine and knows that lifting his foot will end everything. "You flinched," he said. The way he said it, quiet and precise, made it sound like a diagnosis, a wound he was cataloguing. "Who taught you to flinch like that?" She did not answer. She was staring at his hands. They were enormous, scarred across the knuckles, and they were trembling. The most powerful alpha on the continent, the man who could crush skulls with his bare hands, was trembling because she had flinched. "The pup," she said, because Wren was the only thing that mattered. "Please. He has a fever. He hasn't eaten properly in days. He's Kieran Ashenmore's son, the legitimate heir, and they were starving him. Please, your healer." Kyle turned his head toward Tormund. The movement was mechanical, as if it cost him something physical to take his eyes off her. "Give me the pup." Tormund handed Wren over without hesitation. The Alpha King took the infant in hands that suddenly looked impossibly gentle, his scarred fingers cradling the tiny body with the precision of someone handling a bird with a broken wing. He pulled back the makeshift sling, examined the pup's face, pressed his thumb against the small chest. "His heartbeat is irregular," Kyle said. "Maren. 20 minutes, Alpha. 10. Tell her 10. Marcus scrambled for the radio. Kyle looked back at Lyra. His eyes traveled over her. She knew what he was seeing. The filth, the blood, the rust stains, the torn clothes, the bruises old and new, layered across her arms like rings in a tree trunk, telling the story of year after year of casual violence. The sharpness of her collarbones visible through the ripped collar of her shirt. The foot swollen to twice its normal size, turning purple-black. Something changed in his face. She watched it happen in real time. The amber of his eyes bled outward, swallowed by black, as his wolf pushed toward the surface. His lips pulled back from his teeth, and she saw his canines longer than they should have been, the wolf distorting the human mouth. "Who?" he said, and the word was a growl, a sound no human throat should have been able to produce. "Did this to you?" "It doesn't matter. It is the only thing that matters." "No, Wren is the only thing that matters. I didn't crawl through that pipe for me. I came because he was dying, and no one was going to save him. If you can heal him, then I'll go. I'll go back to Ashenmoor. I'll face whatever punishment. I just need him to live." Kyle Blackveil looked at her, as if she had said something in a language he did not speak. She saw the incomprehension on his face, followed by a flash of something raw, something that looked almost like pain. "You are not going back," he said. "You are never going back. You don't get to decide that." The silence in the room was absolute. Tormund had stopped breathing. Marcus's hand hovered over the radio. The young wolf with the chin scar had backed himself into a corner and was making himself as small as possible, which was the correct instinct when an alpha king was in the grip of something none of them fully understood. Kyle's jaw tightened. She could see the muscles working beneath his skin, the visible effort of a man who commanded thousands, forcing himself to speak gently to a woman who weighed 100 pounds, soaking wet and had a broken foot. "You are right," he said. "I don't. But I am asking." Something in Lyra's chest moved again. That sleeping thing. It turned, stretched, pressed against the walls of its enclosure. She put her hand over her sternum, confused. "I don't understand what's happening." "Yes, you do." He knelt. The Alpha King of Blackveil, the beast, the most feared wolf on the continent, went to his knees in front of her. Tormund made a strangled sound. Kyle ignored him. He was eye level with her now, and this close she could smell him. Cedar smoke, and iron and snow that was the surface, but beneath it something deeper, something her body recognized before her mind did. Warmth. Safety. Home. A word she hadn't had a use for since she was 11 years old. "I've waited 31 years, he said. "My wolf has been tearing me apart from the inside because I could not find you. Counselors told me you were dead. Elders told me to take a chosen mate. I refused everyone. Because I knew." His voice cracked on the word, just barely. A hairline fracture. "I knew you were out there, and you are here, in a patrol station, covered in blood, holding another man's child, and you are the most—" He stopped, swallowed. His throat worked visibly. "I'm not what you think," Lyra said. "I'm wolfless. I'm an omega. I'm nobody's anything. You crawled through enemy territory with a dying pup because no one else would save him." His hand came up slowly and hovered near her face without touching it. "Asking permission. That is not nobody." She leaned her cheek into his palm. She did not decide to do it. Her body decided. The warmth of his hand against her skin was like stepping into sunlight after years in a basement, and the sound that came out of her, involuntary and quiet, was something between a sigh and a sob. His thumb traced the edge of her cheekbone. Gentle. So gentle it made her throat ache. Wren whimpered. The sound cut through the moment like a knife. Lyra pulled back. "The pup. Please." Kyle nodded once. He stood and the alpha was back, the softness locked away behind command. "Tormund, take them both to the main house, my quarters. Have the fire lit and food brought. Clean clothes, healing supplies, water." "Your quarters, Alpha." Did I stutter? No, Alpha. The healer meets us there. No one else enters. No one touches her. If anyone so much as speaks to her with the wrong tone, they answer to me personally. He looked at Lyra. "Can you walk? I've been walking." He made a sound that might have been a laugh in another life. "Stubborn. That's one word for it." He picked her up. She expected roughness because that was all she knew. But he lifted her the way you lift something you are afraid of breaking. One arm beneath her knees, one behind her back. Wren still cradled against his chest in the curve of his other arm. She was pressed against him, and his body heat was furnace level, and the smell of cedar and snow and iron was everywhere, and the sleeping thing in her chest was fully awake now, pacing, restless, pushing. "What is that?" she whispered. "Your wolf." "I don't have a wolf." "You do. She's been dormant, suppressed. Probably since you were a child." His jaw was set. "We'll find out why." They moved through the forest. Kyle walked as if he weighed nothing, as if she and Wren were no more burden than a jacket. The trees parted for him. Not literally, but the shadows seemed to lean away the underbrush, flattening the path widening. Even the wind changed direction. The main house was not what she expected. Ashenmoor's pack house was a concrete barracks, functional and ugly, smelling of bleach and stale coffee and male sweat. Blackvale's main house was built of stone and dark timber, set into the mountainside like a living thing, windows glowing warm amber in the pre-dawn darkness. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys. The front doors were 20 feet tall, carved with wolves running through a forest, and they opened before Cale reached them, 2 guards pulling them wide without a word. The interior smelled like beeswax and burning pine, and faintly something baking. Bread. The stone floors were covered with thick, woven rugs in deep reds and blues. A staircase wound upward into darkness. Mar and Kyle barked, and a door opened on the second landing, and a woman appeared who was not at all what Lyra had imagined. Maren, the legendary healer, was in her 60s, small with short silver hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and what appeared to be a half-eaten sandwich in one hand. "You woke me up for this, you'd better have a good—" She stopped. Her eyes went to the pup in Cale's arms, then to Lyra. Professional assessment, rapid and thorough. "Bring them both to the healing room, now." The next hour was a blur of warm water and gentle hands, and Marin's voice, which was sharp and no nonsense, and exactly what a good healer's voice should be. She took Wren first, because Lyra insisted, and Lyra watched from a cot as Maren unwrapped the infant, examined him, with quick shore movements, muttered in medical terminology, that Lyra mostly understood from her years as an assistant. Dehydration, malnutrition, fever from an untreated ear infection. This child has been neglected for weeks. Maren looked up at Cale, who stood in the doorway, filling it again, his face carved from stone. "He's an alpha pup. He's Kieran Ashenmoor's heir." "I didn't ask whose he is politically. I said he's an alpha pup. Do you know what happens when an alpha pup is starved in the first 8 weeks? The wolf doesn't develop properly. If I hadn't seen him tonight, you'd be looking at permanent damage by next week." The sound Kyle made was subterranean, a rumble that Lyra felt in her bones. Maren was already working. An IV for hydration, something in a syringe that she injected into Wren's tiny thigh with apologetic efficiency, while the pup screamed. Antibiotics, nutrients. Within 30 minutes, Wren was drinking from a bottle that Maren prepared with a formula that smelled like warm milk and something herbal, and his colour was coming back, the ashy grey fading to pink. Lyra cried. She had not cried in years. Not when her mother died, not when the pack had dragged her to the centre of the clearing on her 13th birthday and watched her fail to shift, not when Petra had slapped her for speaking without permission. But watching Wren drink, watching his tiny hands clutch the bottle, watching his eyes focus and his breathing steady, she cried. The tears came out silently, rolling down her face, and she did not wipe them away, because her hands were shaking too badly. Kyle crossed the room. He sat on the edge of the cot beside her. He did not touch her. He just sat there, a wall of warmth and cedar smoke and quiet fury. And when she leaned sideways, her shoulder touching his arm, he went perfectly still and let her. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. You saved him. You have the healer. You had the courage." Maren finished with Wren settled him in a proper medical bassinet with warming pads and a monitor, and then turned to Lyra with the expression of a woman who has seen bad things, but can still be newly appalled. "Take off your shirt." "I'm fine. You have a broken foot, second-degree friction, burns on both shoulders, and you're running a fever of 102. You have not been fine for some time. Take off your shirt, or I'll have the Alpha hold you down." "I would never," Kyle said quietly. Maren sighed. Figure of speech. She knows that. "Take off the shirt, child." Lyra took off the shirt. The room went silent. The bruises were a map. Years of them. Old ones, yellow-green and faded, layered beneath new ones, purple-black and fresh. Across her ribs. Across her back. A pattern that spoke of kicks of being thrown against walls of casual backhands, from people who did not think of her as a person, but as a thing that could absorb impact, and beneath the bruises across her upper back, something else. Scars. Not from beatings. These were deliberate. Thin, precise lines carved into her skin in a pattern that Lyra had never been able to see clearly, because they were on her back, and she had no one to ask. Maren put down her instruments. She put on her glasses. She walked behind Lyra and looked at the scars for a very long time. "Kyle," she said, and her voice was different now. The briskness gone, replaced by something Lyra could not identify. "Come look at this." He came around. Lyra heard him stop behind her. She heard his breathing change. "What?" she said. "What is it I've had those since I was a child? I thought they were from the fever I had when I was 3. "These aren't from a fever," Maren said. "These are binding marks. Binding marks. Someone carved a suppression sigil into your skin when you were a child. Old magic. Blood magic. The kind that hasn't been practiced openly in 50 years. Maren's fingers hovered over the scars, not touching. "This is why you can't shift. This is why you think you don't have a wolf. Someone sealed her away." Lyra felt the world tilt. "Who would do that?" "Someone who wanted to keep you weak," Kyle said. His voice was barely human. "Someone who knew what you were and made sure you'd never find out. What I am, I'm an Omega." "I'm nothing." "You are not an Omega." Maren pulled down a book from a shelf on the wall. Old, leather-bound, the pages thick as cloth. She flipped to a page and held it up. The illustration showed a pattern of scars, the same pattern that was on Lyra's back. Beneath it, text in the old tongue that Lyra could not read. "This binding sigil is specific. It was designed for one purpose, to suppress a bloodline wolf of the highest order." Maren looked at her over the glasses. "Child, who was your father?" "I don't know. A drifter. He passed through Ashenmoor before I was born." "Did he leave anything behind?" "Any identifying mark?" Lyra touched her left wrist, the crescent scar. "My mother said he had a birthmark. Here, I have the same one." Maren took her wrist, turned it to the light. The crescent caught the lamplight, and for a moment, just a moment, it seemed to glow, a trick of the light. It had to be. Maren let go of her wrist and sat down heavily in a chair. She looked at Kyle. "That's a Moonborn mark," Maren said. "Her father was from the Moonborn line. That line died out 20 years ago." "Apparently not." Kyle looked at Lyra. She watched something move through his eyes. A calculation, a reassessment, then something else, entirely. Something that was not about politics or bloodlines, but about the woman sitting on the cot in front of him, with bruises on her ribs and a stolen baby in a bassinet beside her. "It doesn't change anything," he said. "It changes everything," Maren corrected. "It changes nothing about what she is to me." The words settled over Lyra like a blanket. She pulled them apart, looking for the lie, the angle, the thing she would have to pay for later. There was nothing. Just a man looking at her, as if she were the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. "You need to rest," Maren said to Lyra. "Both of you. The pup is stable. I'll monitor him through the night. And in the morning we're going to talk about those binding marks and what happens when we remove them." "Can they be removed?" Lyra asked. "Yes, but the process is not pleasant, and I want you at full strength first." Maren paused. "And Lyra, when that wolf wakes up, you're going to feel like a completely different person, because you've been living with half of yourself, locked in a cage your entire life." Lyra slept. She slept in a bed for the first time in years, because at Ashenmoor, her quarters had been a cot in the supply closet next to the clinic. This bed was real. Sheets that smelled like lavender, a mattress that did not sag, a quilt heavy enough to feel like being held. Kyle did not sleep in the bed. She learned later that he had sat in the chair by the door all night awake, watching the hallway, guarding. She woke at noon to the sound of Wren crying, and this time it was a healthy cry, a hungry cry, the kind of cry that meant life and demand, and the absolute certainty of an infant that someone should come. She was out of the bed before she was fully conscious, her broken foot hitting the floor, and the pain was a white flash, but she was already moving toward the bassinet. Kyle was there. He had Wren in his arms, and he was heating a bottle over a small burner, testing the temperature on his wrist, with the casual competence of a man who had done this before, and Lyra stopped in the doorway and watched because the image was so far from anything she had expected that her brain couldn't integrate it. The Alpha King of Black Veil, the beast, heating formula, testing it on his wrist. "Sit down," he said, without turning around. "Your foot." "How did you know I was standing?" "I know where you are at every moment. It's not a choice. Sit down." She sat. He brought her the bottle and the baby. She fed Wren, and the pup ate with the ferocious concentration of an infant who had learned that food was not guaranteed, and Lyra understood that feeling in her bones. "I need to tell you something," Kyle said. He was leaning against the wall across from her, arms crossed, and she could see the effort it was costing him not to come closer. "Ashenmoor knows the pup is gone. Gregor has sent a formal demand for return of the heir." Lyra's hands tightened on the bottle. Wren made a small sound of protest. "He also claimed you kidnapped the infant, that you're a dangerous rogue wolf who should be executed on sight." "I'm not surprised. I have 200 warriors and a personal desire to level Ashenmoor to the foundation stones. But I am a king, and kings have to consider consequences." He paused. "I told them no. No what? No to everything. The pup stays. You stay. If they want to discuss it, they can send a delegation, and that delegation can explain to me personally why a 7-week-old alpha heir was found in a dog crate with a note that said, 'Do not feed.'" Lyra looked up. "They'll deny it. They can deny it to my face. I'd enjoy that." There was something terrifying about the way he said it. Not the volume, which was low, but the absolute certainty. This was a man who had been wanting an excuse to hold Ashenmoor accountable, and Lyra and Wren had handed it to him, wrapped in a dirty undershirt. "You're using this politically," she said. He looked at her. The amber eyes held something she was starting to recognize, the faintly stunned expression of a man who was not accustomed to being challenged. "Yes," he said. "I'm also using it because a baby was being murdered, and the woman who saved him is my mate. Those things are not mutually exclusive." She did not have an answer for that. The days blurred together. Maren splintered her foot and wrapped her shoulder burns and forced her to eat 5 small meals a day, each one carefully calibrated for a body that had been malnourished for years. Your bones are those of a 60-year-old woman, Maren told her flatly on the third day. Your iron levels are criminal. Whoever was responsible for feeding you should be charged with attempted murder. Ren improved rapidly. By the fourth day he was alert, grabbing at objects, making the small chattering sounds that well-fed pups make. He had his father's dark hair, but his mother's eyes, a startling green that followed Lyra wherever she went, with an intensity that made her uncomfortable because she didn't want to love this child. Loving things was dangerous. Loving things gave the world a handle to hurt you. But Ren didn't care about her philosophy. He cried when she put him down. He slept best when she held him against her chest. His ear pressed to her heartbeat. He curled his tiny fingers around her thumb and held on with a grip that was absurdly strong for something that weighed 8 pounds. She loved him. She knew it was happening, and she could not stop it. Kyle kept his distance. Physically. He was always there, always. Somewhere in her peripheral vision, always close enough to reach in seconds. But he didn't touch her again after that first night. She understood why. He was giving her space. He was being careful with her the way you are careful with a wild animal that has been caged, knowing that gentleness must be earned and not assumed. It made her want to scream. Because the bond was real. She felt it constantly, a low hum in her chest, a pull toward him that intensified whenever he was near and ached like a phantom limb when he wasn't. The sleeping thing inside her, the wolf she was not supposed to have, was no longer sleeping. She could feel it prowling the edges of her consciousness, pushing against the binding marks on her back, testing the walls of its prison. On the 5th day, the delegation from Ashenmoor arrived. Lyra watched from a second-floor window as they came through the main gate. 3 wolves. Gregor the Beta, a thin man with a narrow face and clever eyes. Petra, his mate, in a fur coat that Lyra recognized as the former Luna's, the one that had disappeared from the pack house the day after the Luna's funeral. And a third figure older, stooped, who Lyra recognized with a shock that nearly buckled her knees. Elder Sarah, the pack's eldest counselor, the woman who had presided over Lyra's failed shifting ceremony, the woman who had been the first to call her hollow. Kyle met them in the great hall. Lyra was not supposed to be there, but she had spent 6 years in a pack where being invisible was a survival skill, and old habits served her well. She found a servants' corridor that overlooked the hall through a latticed screen, and settled there with Ren in her arms, watching. The great hall was designed to intimidate. 40-foot ceilings, stone columns carved with wolves, a throne of black wood at the far end on a raised platform, and Kyle sitting in it, with the lazy posture of a predator that does not need to prove it is dangerous. Gregor spoke first. His voice was smooth, reasonable, the voice of a man who had practiced this speech. Alpha King, we come in good faith. One of our pack members, a disturbed Omega named Lyra, has stolen the heir to our territory and fled across your border. We ask only for the safe return of the child and the Omega, who requires medical attention for her mental instability. Kyle said nothing. He let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Gregor's left hand began to twitch. The child you describe, Kyle said finally conversationally, was found with a fever of 104, severely dehydrated, malnourished with an untreated ear infection. He was wrapped in a soiled blanket inside a crate designed for animals. He paused. In your pack's nursery. The child was receiving care. The Omega misunderstood the situation. My healer examined the pup. Her professional opinion is that without intervention, the child had 48 hours to live. Would you like me to bring her in? She's very detailed in her reports. Gregor's smooth facade flickered. Petra put her hand on his arm. Alpha King, we meant no harm to the child. There were complications after the Luna's death, staffing changes. The pup fell through administrative gaps. Administrative gaps. Kyle tasted the words as if they were something rotten. An interesting phrase for letting a baby starve. The Omega has poisoned your mind against us, Petra said. Her voice was higher now, sharper. She has always been unstable. A wolfless girl bitter about her status, seeking attention. The Omega huaset otsos, Kyle said, and something in his voice changed a temperature drop so sudden that Lyra could see Gregor physically lean back. Has a name, and she is my mate. The silence was a living thing. Gregor recovered first. Your mate Alpha King, with respect, the girl is wolfless. She cannot be mated to an alpha of your stature. It's biologically impossible. She is deceiving you. Thank you for explaining the biology of my own bond to me, Beta. Kyle stood. The movement was slow, and it was terrifying in its slowness, because it gave everyone time to realize how large he was. Here is what is going to happen. The pup remains under Black Veil protection. The Omega, Lyra, remains here. If Kieran Ashenmore wishes to discuss custody of his heir, he can come himself, assuming he is still Alpha, and not a puppet with your hand up his back. Gregor's face went white. You cannot. I can. I have. What I'd like to discuss now, Beta, is why a pup was being starved in your territory, and why the only person who tried to save him was the one you called mentally unstable. Gregor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Elder Sarah spoke for the first time. Her voice was paper-thin, dry, the voice of very old bones. Alpha King, may I speak? Kale inclined his head. Sarah stepped forward. She was looking not at Kale, but at the latticed screen on the second floor. And Lyra realized with a cold shock that the old woman knew she was there. The girl is dangerous, Sarah said. Not because she is mad, because she is not what she appears. Her father was not a drifter. Her father was Aryan Moonborn, the last of the Moonborn line, who passed through Ashenmore 24 years ago, during his flight from the Council of Elders, who had ordered his execution for the crime of existing. Kyle's expression didn't change, but Lyra saw his hand tighten on the arm of the throne. I was the one who bound her wolf, Sarah continued, when she was 3 years old. I carved the sigils myself, because a moon-born wolf in Ashenmore would have drawn the Council's attention, and the Council would have destroyed the pack to get to her. I did what was necessary to protect my people. You mutilated a child, Kale said. I saved 1,000 lives. By destroying one, Sarah's face did something unexpected. It crumpled. For just a moment, the hardness fractured, and Lyra saw something underneath that she had never expected to see on Elder Sarah's face. Grief. Old heavy, carried so long it had become the shape of her spine. I visited her mother, Sarah said quietly. Every week until she died. I brought medicine. I brought food. I was the one who argued against exiling the child after Mera's death. I could not undo what I had done without risking the pack, but I tried to. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The moment of vulnerability sealed over like ice forming on a pond. It does not matter. What matters is that if you remove those binding marks, you will unleash a wolf that has been caged for 20 years. A moon-born wolf. Do you understand what that means? I know what a moon-born wolf is. Then you know that the Council will come. Let them. The words fell like stones into water. Gregor looked at Kyle as if he had announced his intention to fight the ocean. Petra clutched her fur coat tighter. Sarah simply nodded as if she had expected this answer, and found it neither surprising nor comforting. We are finished here, Kyle said. You may return to Ashenmore. Tell your Alpha that Black Veil has taken formal guardianship of the heir, and that any attempt to reclaim the child will be treated as an act of war." Gregor sputtered. "You can't just—" "I can. I have. Tormund will escort you to the border." They left. Lyra watched them go through the latticed screen, her heart hammering Ren, warm and oblivious against her chest. Elder Sarah paused at the door. She did not look up at the screen again, but she said loud enough for her old voice to carry, "The sigils will hurt when they break. The pain is the wolf coming through. Do not fight it." Then she was gone. Lyra found Kyle in the hall. He was still standing by the throne, his hands braced against the carved armrest, his head bowed. The posture was so unlike him that she stopped in the doorway. "You heard everything," he said. "I'm not a Moonborn. The mark on your wrist says otherwise. I've been wolfless for 20 years. Whatever my father was, I'm not." He turned. The amber eyes were steady, but she could see the wolf behind them, close to the surface, restless. "Maren says the binding can be removed. Safely. With time and care. And if my wolf comes out and she's, some legendary bloodline creature, what happens then? Then you are exactly who you are, with more of yourself available." "You make it sound simple." "It is simple. Everything about you is simple. I found my mate. She is brave and stubborn, and she steals babies from death and crawls through pipes with a broken foot. The rest is details." She wanted to argue with him. She had been arguing with kindness her entire life, because kindness in Ashenmoor had always been a trap, a hook with a barb inside it, and she kept waiting for Kyle's barb, and it kept not appearing. "Why don't you touch me?" she asked. He went still. "What? You haven't touched me since that first night. You carried me here, you touched my face, and then nothing. 5 days. Because you flinch. I flinched once. Once was enough. I will not be something you endure. When you reach for me, I will be there. But I won't take what isn't offered." She stood in the doorway of the great hall of Black Veil, holding another man's child, wearing borrowed clothes that smelled like lavender, with binding marks carved into her back, and a wolf she did not know howling silently inside her chest, and she looked at the most powerful man on the continent, and she reached out her hand. He took it. His fingers closed around hers, and the bond blazed, a physical sensation, heat and light, and a rightness so profound it was almost painful. His breath caught. She heard it. The Alpha King of Black Veil catching his breath because a wolfless girl held his hand. "There," she said. "I'm reaching." He pulled her close. Not rough, not sudden, but inevitable, like gravity, like the tide. His arms came around her, careful of the bruises, careful of the pup between them, and he held her. And she felt, for the first time in 20 years, the walls she had built to survive begin to crack. "I'm going to remove the binding marks," she said into his chest. "When you're ready. Tomorrow. That's not ready that's impatient. Kyle." He pulled back enough to look at her. His mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, the memory of what his face might do if it remembered how. "Tomorrow," he agreed. Tomorrow came, and with it Maren carrying a leather case of instruments and an expression that suggested she had not slept and blamed Lyra personally. The process, Maren explained, laying out her tools on a cloth beside the healing room cot, is essentially the reverse of the original carving. The sigils are layered. Each one must be broken individually. There are 7. When each one breaks, you will feel your wolf push forward. It will be painful. Intensely so. I can mitigate some of it, but not all. I understand. Do you? Because the last time a binding was removed from a moonborn wolf, The wolf nearly destroyed the healing room. Then maybe do it outside. Maren looked at her, the ghost of an approving smile. I like you. Don't make me regret that. Lie on your stomach. Kyle was in the room. He had positioned himself in the chair nearest the cot, close enough that Lyra could reach out and touch him if she needed to. His face was expressionless. His eyes were not. Maren began. The first sigil broke like glass. Lyra felt it shatter somewhere deep inside her body, not in her back where the scar was, but in her chest in the hollow place, and the pain was blinding, white-hot, a wire pulled through her spine. She gripped the edge of the cot and did not scream. She had been trained not to scream. Years of beatings had taught her to swallow sound. Breathe, Maren said. The second sigil. The third. Each one worse than the last, because each one released more of the wolf, and the wolf was angry. 20 years of captivity, and she was raging against the walls, and Lyra could feel her now not as a sleeping thing, but as a force, a presence, a second consciousness pressing against the inside of her skull with a fury that was almost exhilarating. The fourth sigil broke, and Lyra screamed. The sound was not human. It came from her throat and from somewhere else, somewhere deeper, and the windows of the healing room cracked, all of them, simultaneously. The glass did not shatter, but it webbed fine lines, spreading outward like frost. Kyle was on his feet. Maren held up a hand. Sit down. She's fine. She is not fine. She is doing exactly what she's supposed to do. Sit. Down. He sat. His hands were gripping his own thighs, hard enough that his knuckles were white. The fifth sigil. The sixth. Lyra's vision went silver, then gold, then a colour she did not have a name for, a colour that existed only in the space between wolf and human. She could feel her bones shifting. Not a full shift, not yet, but the preparation for one. Her body remembering something it had been denied for 20 years. Last one, Maren said. Her voice was very far away. This is the primary seal. When it breaks, your wolf will come through. Don't fight her. Don't try to control her. Let her come. The seventh sigil broke. The world split open. Lyra felt her body come apart and reassemble. Not painfully, not anymore, but with a terrible rightness, like a dislocated joint popping back into its socket. Her spine extended. Her hands changed. Her senses exploded outward, and suddenly she could hear Kyle's heartbeat from across the room, fast and hard, could smell the herbs in Maren's kit, the lavender on the sheets, the pine resin on the window frames, the snow on the mountain, the deer in the forest 3 miles away. She landed on 4 paws. The cot was beneath her, broken. The healing room suddenly felt small. She was large, much larger than an omega wolf should be. She could see her own shadow on the wall thrown by the lamp, and it filled the room. Her fur was silver white, the colour of the moon on water. And when she turned her head, she caught her own reflection in the cracked window. Eyes the colour of moonlight, not amber, not gold, silver, luminous. Maren had backed against the wall, not in fear, but in awe. Moon goddess, protect us, she whispered. Kyle stood slowly. He looked at the wolf, and the wolf looked at him. And something passed between them that was beyond language, beyond human comprehension. The bond which had been a hum became a roar, not painful, overwhelming. A connection so deep it felt like having a second heart. The wolf walked toward him. Her steps cracked the stone floor. She pressed her massive head against his chest, and he put his hands in the silver fur, and held on, and Lyra, somewhere inside, the wolf felt tears she could not shed in this form. She shifted back. It happened naturally, easily, as if she had been doing it her whole life. One moment wolf, the next moment woman kneeling on the cracked floor, naked, shaking her back, smooth and unscarred. The binding marks were gone. 20 years of carved imprisonment erased. Kyle pulled off his shirt and wrapped it around her. It hung to her knees and smelled like him, and she pulled it close. "A moon-born wolf," Maren said. She had sat down heavily on the only remaining intact piece of furniture. "A true moon-born wolf. I read about them. I never expected to see one." "What does it mean?" Lyra asked. Her voice was different, stronger, resonant. "It means you are one of the rarest wolves in existence. Your bloodline was thought to be extinct. The Moonborn were the original wolves, the first line created by the moon goddess herself. They could heal with touch. They could sense lies. They could—" Maren paused. "They could calm any wolf, no matter how far gone. Even ferals, even beasts." Kyle said nothing, but Lyra saw his jaw clench, and she understood. His wolf, the beast, the one he had been fighting his entire life to control. She was the answer to a problem he had never spoken aloud. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't what? Don't think that's why you want me. Because I'm useful." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw anger directed at her. Not rage, not violence, but a sharp, clean anger. "I wanted you when I thought you were a wolfless Omega, with a broken foot and a stolen baby. I wanted you when you smelled like rust and blood and dirt. My wolf recognized you before I knew what you were. The Moonborn bloodline is a fact. It is not a reason." She believed him, not because the words were beautiful though they were in their blunt, graceless way, but because she could feel him through the bond, now fully open, and there was no deception there. Just want. Just certainty. Just a man who had waited 31 years, and would wait 31 more if she asked. She did not ask. "What happens now?" she said. "Now Gregor and Ashenmore are going to do something stupid, because that's what cornered cowards do. And we will be ready." He was right. They were not ready enough. It happened 3 days later, in the early hours of the morning when the sky was still dark, and the snow had just begun to fall. Lyra woke to the sound of howling. Not Black Veil wolves. The pitch was wrong, higher, more frantic, the sound of wolves being driven rather than running. Kyle was already on his feet, already moving, already the Alpha King, and not the man who had fallen asleep with his hand resting on her ankle, because that was as much as she had offered, and he had taken it as if it were the world. "Stay here," he said. "Lock the door. Keep the pup close." "What's happening?" "Ashenmore wolves. At least 50. They've crossed the border." 50 wolves is not an army. That's a suicide mission." His jaw tightened. "Unless it's a distraction." He was gone. The door closed. She locked it. Wren was awake, fussing, sensing the tension. She held him close and paced the room, and the wolf inside her, newly freed, was pacing too, restless, alert, every sense stretched to its limit. She heard the fighting. Even through stone walls and closed windows, she could hear it. The crack of bone, the snarl of wolves, the sounds of a border skirmish. It went on for 20 minutes, and then it stopped, and in the silence that followed, the door to the room opened. Not the main door. The servant's entrance, the one she had used to watch the great hall from the latticed screen, the one she had not thought to lock. Petra stood in the doorway. The fur coat was gone. She was wearing combat gear, black functional, and her face was stripped of the careful politeness she had worn in the great hall. She looked like what she was, a woman who had orchestrated the slow murder of an infant and had come to finish the job. "Give me the child," Petra said. Lyra backed away. Wren was in her arms, warm and alive, and making small sounds of distress. "You know you can't win this," Petra continued. You've never been a fighter, Lyra. You're the girl who mopped floors and took slaps without flinching. That's all you've ever been. That's not all I am. The wolf is new. You don't know how to use it. Hand over the boy and I'll let you live. Gregor needs the heir. Not alive, specifically. Just the body. For political purposes. You understand? Lyra felt something she had never felt before. Not fear. Not resignation. Rage. Clean white, illuminating rage. And it came from both her and her wolf, simultaneously, a unified fury that was as natural as breathing. You dressed a dead woman's baby in rags, Lyra said. You fed her pup to a dog crate. You wore her coat to her husband's negotiation. And now you're standing in my room, asking me to hand over the child I crawled through a pipe to save. She paused. No. Petra shifted. It was fast. A lean grey wolf teeth bared, leaping toward Lyra with the practiced efficiency of a trained fighter. Lyra shifted faster. The silver wolf filled the room. Petra's wolf mid-leap froze. Not voluntarily. Not a choice. The moonborn wolf's presence was a physical force, a pressure wave, and the grey wolf slammed into it and stopped mid-air paws, scrabbling eyes wide, with a terror that went beyond instinct and into something ancient and genetic. The old wolves knew the moonborn. The old wolves remembered what they were. Lyra did not bite, did not claw, did not attack. She simply stood over Wren's bassinet, silver and enormous and impossibly still, and she looked at the grey wolf, and she let her presence speak. Petra shifted back. She was on the floor, gasping, shaking her eyes blown wide. What are you? I am the wolf you tried to keep hollow. Lyra shifted back, pulled Cale's shirt around herself, and picked up Wren. The pup was crying. She held him close. And you are done. The door burst open. Cale, blood on his hands, a cut across his forehead, his eyes wild. He took in the scene in a heartbeat. Petra on the floor. Lyra holding Wren. The cracked floor where the silver wolf had stood. She came for the pup, Lyra said calmly. She wanted his body for political leverage. Kyle looked at Petra. The woman shrank back. Not from the Alpha King, Lyra realized, from the expression on his face, from the absolute, cold certainty of what was about to happen. Please, Petra said. Gregor made me. He said if we didn't reclaim the heir, the pack would fall apart. I didn't want to. You wore the Luna's coat, Kyle said, to her mate's negotiation, while her son starved in a box. He turned to the guards who had appeared behind him. Take her, and find Gregor. They found Gregor at the border. The distraction had failed, and the beta was trying to retreat with the remaining Ashenmoor wolves. Blackveil patrols had him surrounded. He was dragged to the Great Hall in chains, along with 12 Ashenmoor wolves who had participated in the incursion. The trial, if it could be called that, took place at dawn. The Great Hall was full. Every Blackveil wolf who could attend was present, lining the walls, filling the balconies. Lyra stood beside the throne. Kyle had not asked her to. She had walked there herself, holding Wren, and he had looked at her, with an expression that she was starting to understand, was his version of joy. Gregor knelt before the throne in chains. He looked smaller than she remembered. The cleverness in his eyes had curdled into something sour and desperate. Beta Gregor of Ashenmoor, Kyle said, and his voice carried to every corner of the hall. You stand accused of attempted murder, of an infant heir conspiracy to seize power through the death of a child, violation of Blackveil borders, and assault on this territory's protectorate. Ashenmoor does not recognize Blackveil's protectorate over our heir. Ashenmoor's recognition is not required. The evidence stands. Your own mate confessed. He paused. What do you have to say? Gregor looked up. His eyes found Lyra. For a moment, something flickered there. Not remorse exactly. Something closer to bewilderment. She was nothing, he said. She mopped floors. She couldn't shift. How was I supposed to know she was? You weren't supposed to know what she was. You were supposed to not starve a baby. Gregor's mouth opened. Closed. Kieran Ashenmore has been contacted, Kyle continued. He has renounced his claim to the heir in exchange for Black Veil's assurance that the child will be raised and protected. He also renounced his position as Alpha of Ashenmore, effective immediately citing his failure to protect his own son. The words were clinical, factual. They landed like hammer blows. Ashenmore is without an Alpha, without a Beta, without an heir. The Council of Pax will determine its fate. Gregor's face crumbled, not into tears, into the kind of blankness that comes when a man realizes that the story he has been telling himself, the one where he is the protagonist, the clever survivor, the man who did what was necessary, is over. You are sentenced to exile, Kyle said. Stripped of rank, stripped of pack bonds, stripped of territory. You will be escorted to the neutral lands. If you are found within any pack territory, again the sentence is death. Exile. For a wolf worse than death. A slow dissolution of everything that made them who they were. Gregor's head dropped, or his chains clinked against the stone. Petra received the same sentence. She wept. Gregor did not look at her. The Ashenmore wolves who had participated in the incursion were given a choice: submit to Black Veil authority or join their Beta in exile. 8 submitted. 4 chose exile, and Lyra watched them leave through the great gates with an emotion she hadn't expected. Not satisfaction. Not vindication. Something quieter and more complicated. The end of a chapter she had not chosen to write. That evening, Kyle found her on the balcony of his quarters. Wren was asleep in the bassinet inside, warm and fed and alive. The snow had stopped. The sky was clear, and the moon was full, and its light turned the forest below into a silver sea. The pack wants a ceremony, he said. What kind of ceremony? The kind where I mark you in front of everyone, and you become Luna of Black Veil. She was quiet for a long time. The moon hung above them like a lantern. She could feel her wolf quiet now, content curled inside her chest like a cat in sunlight. I've been a servant my whole life, she said. I've mopped blood off clinic floors. I've eaten scraps. I've been called hollow since I was 13 years old. And now you want me to stand in front of 2,000 wolves and be their queen? Yes. You're not worried I'll embarrass you? He leaned against the railing beside her, close, not touching, because he still waited for her, always. You crawled through a pipe with a broken foot to save a child that wasn't yours. You stood down a trained fighter without throwing a single blow. You looked me in the eye and told me I don't get to decide your fate while I was standing in my own throne room. He paused. I have never been less worried about anything in my life. She laughed. It came out rusty and unused, a sound she barely recognized, and his head turned sharply, and she saw the look on his face, the way his eyes widened, the way his lips parted, as if the sound of her laughter was something he planned to spend the rest of his life collecting. Fine, she said. But I'm not wearing white. I'll look like a ghost. Wear whatever you want. Wear my shirt. I don't care. Just be there. The ceremony took place 3 days later in the great hall under the full moon that poured through the enormous skylight in the ceiling that Lyra had not noticed before. 2,000 wolves filled the hall and the courtyard beyond. Tormund stood at the front, in a formal uniform that looked uncomfortable on him. Maren sat in a chair to the side. Wren on her lap, because she had declared herself the pup's medical guardian, and no one, including the Alpha King, had challenged this. Lyra wore dark blue, a dress that Maren had procured from somewhere simple fitted the color of a midnight sky. Her hair was down, brushing her shoulders, and the crescent mark on her wrist was visible, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Kyle stood at the front of the hall. Black formal wear, the scar on his face, catching the light. He watched her walk toward him, and his face did something Shu had never seen it do before. It broke open. The careful control, the alpha mask, the king's composure, all of it fell away. And what was underneath was raw and vulnerable and absolutely terrified, and she understood in that moment that the most powerful man on the continent was afraid she would change her mind. She reached him. She took his hand. "I'm here," she said. "I know." The words were the old ones, the formal mating vows of the wolf packs, spoken in the ancient tongue. Kyle said them in a voice that did not waver, looking at her, the way a man looks at the first light after a very long darkness. Then the marking. He tilted her head to the side, exposing the curve of her neck, and she felt his breath first warm, and then his lips gentle, and then the bite. Sharp. Bright. A pain that was not a pain at all, but a key turning in a lock, and the bond between them, which had been a hum and then a roar, became something structural, foundational, part of the architecture of her being. She marked him back. Tradition required only the alpha to mark, but she was moon-born, and the moon-born had their own traditions. And when her teeth broke the skin of his neck, she felt him shudder. His hands tightened on her waist. A sound came from his throat, low and involuntary, and 2,000 wolves heard it, and she didn't care. The hall erupted. Howls, not the frantic howls of battle, but the deep, resonant howls of recognition, the pack acknowledging its Luna. The sound vibrated through the stone, through the floor, through her bones. Ren in Maren's arms began to cry, and then to laugh, the confused sound of an infant, overwhelmed by volume, and Maren bounced him with the ease of a woman who had been delivering babies for 40 years. Lyra stood beside Kale on the dais, and looked out at 2,000 faces, and felt in the hollow place in her chest that had been empty for 20 years, something full. Her wolf pressed against her ribs content. Kyle's hand was on her lower back, warm, steady, possessive, in the way she had learned to distinguish from controlling, not holding her in place, but telling the world that this was where he chose to stand. Later, much later, after the hall had emptied, and the fires had banked, and the snow had begun to fall again, she sat on the floor of their quarters with Ren in her lap. The pup was gnawing on a wooden teething ring that Tormund had carved himself, which was a detail Lyra treasured, because it told her everything she needed to know about the kind of pack she had joined. Kyle sat across from her, his back against the bed legs, stretched out the formal wear, abandoned for a loose shirt and trousers, the marking bite on his neck still livid. "Kieran agreed to the custody transfer," he said. Is he okay?" As a person, Kale considered this. He's a broken man who failed his mate and his son and knows it. The question of whether he's okay is one that will take years to answer. He paused. He asked about Ren, wanted to know if the pup was healthy, if he was happy. "What did you say?" "I said the pup is being raised by a woman who crawled through a pipe to save him, and that he is the most annoyingly well-loved infant in 3 territories. Ren chose this moment to throw the teething ring at Kale's head. It bounced off his forehead. The Alpha King of Black Vale blinked, once picked it up and handed it back. "Good arm," he said. Lyra laughed. That rusty, unused sound again, but less rusty now. Learning itself again. She looked at the fire, at Ren's small hands, at the wooden ring with its careful carvings, at Kyle's face in the warm light. The scar softened the amber eyes, half closed, watching her, the way he always watched her, as if she might disappear. "I want to visit Ashenmoor," she said. He tensed. "Why? Elder Sarah. She bound my wolf. She carved those marks into a 3-year-old child, and she brought medicine to my mother every week until she died." She turned the teething ring over in her hands. "I want to understand. Both of those things being true at the same time." He was quiet. "Then, I'll come with you." "You don't have to." "I know. I want to." She leaned against his outstretched leg. His hand came up and rested on her head, fingers threading through her hair, and Wren crawled into the space between them, and fell asleep there, warm, safe, the small weight of him pressing against both their legs. Outside the window the moon was setting behind the mountains. The last of its light touched the crescent mark on Lyra's wrist, and for a moment, just a moment, it glowed silver. Not brightly. Not dramatically, just a small, steady pulse, like a heartbeat, like a promise, like a door that had been locked for 20 years finally standing open. She did not close it.